Dragon Ball Z movie villains. For the longest time, they had the reputation of being kind of derogatory, to what came in the anime at the time. You can clearly see the inspiration in the design or even the entire construction from the entire sagas. They just seemed like carbon copies in a way. Janemba being the biggest example of basically just being a bigger, more yellowy Boo. But it wouldn't be fair to say that it was always the case. The likes of Broly, Bojack, and even Garlic Jr., they do seem to be standing on their own two legs without any issue of them copying anyone else. Well, maybe slightly Pilaf with Garlic, but far away enough. But there is one villain who could make people watching the movie before the Android saga say, wait a minute. Today we're going to talk about the brain himself, the one who came before Gero, Dr. W. Hello. It's Dr. Wheelo. Dr. Wheelo debuted all the way back on March the 10th, 1990. What's so interesting about this date? Well, if you are not familiar with the likes of the world's strongest movie itself, it was a whole whopping year before Dr. Gero's debut in the manga, which by the way was August 13th, 1991, and the concept art for the character's weird robotic body has been done by Toriyama. So it's entirely possible that the idea of a brain in a jar sort of scientist was quite fresh in his mind. Although, let's be honest, it's not particularly a new idea, even for the early 90s. It had kind of been done, brains in jars, etc. And Toriyama could have been like, oh, okay, Goku had recently fought aliens, what's next on the list? Robots. Still, Wheelo was first. And he is also the original villain who wanted to steal Goku's body for their own personal gain, predating even Ginyu. What's even more interesting is that he is the only one of those body snatchers out there in the world of Dragon Ball who didn't succeed in any way. Both Captain Ginyu and Zamasu were more lucky than he was. Although, what is even more interesting than all of that is that he wasn't interested in our protagonist in the first place. Now, of course, The World's Strongest, it's a pretty common movie, and you probably know that the initial brief for Dr. Wheelo was to capture the world's strongest who they thought was Master Roshi, for the longest time, the strongest man on Earth. But of course, we know that's not true, not even close. Apparently, his laboratory got encased in ice, as if he were punished by the heavens in some way for performing his horrific experiments, and he is easily frostbitten, heavily so, but his assistant, Dr. Kochin, manages to save and preserve him in some way. Another parallel to Gero, who was transferred to a new body by Android 19 as a brain in a robotic vessel. He's a brain in a jar, but portable. And just as the creator of Cell is interested in modifying humans to build himself an army, he also doesn't hide his own selfish dreams of ruling the world, which kind of makes him sort of more nefarious than Gero, I suppose, who at least didn't want to take over the world just for the sake of it. He at least believed in the betterment of humanity and he wanted to be the one to do it, so it was kind of selfish, but at least he wanted to better humanity instead of subjugating it. Now, let's talk about his assistant for a moment, Dr. Kochin. He is also pretty evil and doesn't attempt to pretend that it is not the case, as he seems to take sheer delight in behaving in a very evil manner. He appears to be an expert in biotechnology, but we don't know that much about him as a person though. I mean, to be fair, he isn't a person, he's a robot, but was he always mechanical? Was there a version of Dr. Kochin that came long before Wheelo turned him into a robot? He seems to display an awful lot of personality for a fully mechanical creation, so there must have been a human base at least. Not only that, but he seems more alive than some of Gero's designs. Also, it kind of seems like Wheelo kills him, because his whole death scene is kind of confusing. One interesting detail is his Shenron-shaped cane, which may prove that he was interested in the Dragon Balls long before the original Dragon Ball even started. Because to be fair, he had been looking for them for up to 50 years before he actually was able to melt the ice, and oh, if he were just a robot, would he be able to even make a wish on Shenron at all? Was there an organic brain in that mechanical body? Well, it's hard to say. And we do not think that Kochin is important enough to establish that fully, so yeah, we just wanted to go into some kind of detail. We'll probably never know why he is so loyal to Dr. Wheelo, the history of them working together as scientist and assistant. I mean, is he merely the creation of the big brain himself, or is there more to it? Did he come into the interest of Dr. Wheelo as his assistant, or was he just built? Also, he created some pretty interesting bio-warriors. First, there are the Bio-Men, who are not only Cybermen copies, but also a reference to the 1955 sci-fi classic This Island Earth. And they do resemble the aliens from said movie even more than the Cybermen do. It's kind of funny that the knockoff of the knockoff is more faithful to the original. There are several fan theories as to whether they may be based on Cybermen in-universe, especially since, thanks to Gohan's dream in the movie, we know that the Saiyan saga had happened by the time we get to the world's strongest, but we don't really know. And honestly, this is just speculation at this point, but it does make a little bit of sense. Also, there are the three brutal warriors, Zap Zap Burr and Ebifuria, Kishime, and Misukatsu. Yeah. Out of all three, only Ebifuria has a proper speaking role in the movie. Also, he and Kishime utilize elemental attacks, ice and thunder, that are not that common within the Dragon Ball universe, while Misukatsu fights because he has a big, massive, flexible body. Yeah, also something that we see much later, but I do wonder why it was decided to make him the odd one out of the three. Their only purpose in life is to test potential candidates for Dr. Wheelo's new body. That's all they're for. And as for Wheelo's robotic body, as we've mentioned at the start of the video, it was designed by Toriyama, and originally was meant to contain more organs of the actual good doctor. But the anime staff opted for just enlarging the brain, suggesting that it was some sort of evolution that caused this predicament, instead of brain juices seeping in and all that stuff. And also, it kind of makes it a bit more kid-friendly if it's just a big brain, because look at the big brain, it's so kind of funny. There's an element of comedy in it, because remember, Dragon Ball is an action comedy. His iconic red blinking eye does seem to reference, of course, 2001 Space Odyssey at some point. Of course it does. HAL 9000? Oh, everybody does that. But does anybody know that there's a sequel to that film? Look it up. Takao Koyama states that every movie villain has to be stronger than the previous one, because that's how shonen anime work. So in terms of might, it will put him between Garlic Jr. and Turles, which kind of means that he could be stronger than Raditz. Also, his cybernetic body seems to be extremely durable, even withstanding Kaioken Kamehameha ×3 combined with the Kamehameha from Roshi, Goku, Gohan, and Krillin. He's stated to be a threat capable of destroying Earth, though at this point, this is hardly a milestone, it's just common. He also seems to have the honor of being the first ever villain in the series to be killed by the Spirit Bomb. You know, it actually working. The translation credit goes to Hermes, by the way. This is a note about Dr. Wheelo from Daizenshuu 7. Wheelo, Doctor, a scientist. History? A scientist who advanced his research in human modifications so that he could rule the world. 50 years ago, he was sealed within the Surumai Suburi Mountains' eternal walls of ice by a weather anomaly, but his brain alone survived. His assistant, Dr. Kochin, gathered the Dragon Balls and used their power to revive his brain. He tried to kill Goku in order to obtain the strongest body. Special characteristics? Only his brain remains and his body is completely mechanical. His armor can withstand even a 4-fold Kaioken. Techniques? He fires energy bullets from his mouth and claws. When he uses his maximum power, its force is great enough to even wipe out the Earth. Battles. He fights Goku and tries to destroy him along with the entire Earth, but is hit by Goku's Genki Dama and explodes. So yeah, Dr. Wheelo has often been overlooked as a villain, but he broke a lot of records in the franchise. It's a shame that there isn't more to this story, right? Maybe we'll discuss a completely unrelated character of Dr. W right now, eh? Okay, obviously we are joking, but it is interesting that 30 years later, Wheelo finally got some attention from Super Dragon Ball Heroes of all places. As far as Heroes goes, this is pretty neat actually. So, first of all, we learn how he originally looked, unless this is an idealized version, which is basically a badass Colonel Sanders rocking Wheelo's iconic red eye. He also has a new mechanical form, which is simpler and rather sleek, though it does lack a bit of that 90s Toriyama charm. And the brain is now regularly sized. In the Universe Creation Saga, he is an ally of Fu, who aids him in creating a new universe. In said universe, he could be acknowledged by Earthlings as a capable leader, and basically controlling them, as he originally intended. Originally, Zeno, Goku, and Vegeta encountered him in Hell, and had to resort to transforming into Super Saiyan 4, obviously, to defeat him. Although the mad scientist was able to actually absorb their attacks, he is hinted as the one who upgraded Zenojim Nemba with the abilities absorbed from the Saiyans, and of course escapes as soon as everything goes awry and the demonic entity is destroyed. Next he appears in the new Space-Time War saga, where, to everyone's surprise I'm sure, he reveals his true identity. In different versions of the story, he is beaten by different people. In the anime, Super Saiyan Gohan knocks him out, whilst both in the manga and the game, he is beaten by the likes of Hearts and Krillin. Probably the weirdest tag team that Heroes ever came up with. But hey, that means that Krilla time was actually a thing. Good for you, buddy. The last time we saw him was in the Supreme Kai of Time saga. In said saga, he is participating in the Super Space Time tournament as a member of Team 5 that contains Hearts, himself, Frieza, Cooler, Turles, Cumber, and Super 17. Scratch that. This tag team is even weirder than Krilldog and Hearts. In the second round, he gets yoinked to planet Glass, where Vidro, that's Yamcha's new girlfriend by the way, sends some Glass soldiers after him. In the manga, he fights against Zeno's Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta on Nemec's arena, but gets his metallic butt handed to him quite easily. He's still alive in both scenarios, so we will no doubt see him again doing stuff in the series. I mean, we would probably read the summaries of the sagas, as Heroes tends to have, maybe one good episode in like 50, let's be real. Still, it's neat that they're expanding the character, and I do wonder if they did it to resort to someone other than Gero perhaps. I mean, after all, he and extended family are now constantly present in other Dragon Ball media, so this is actually a nice change of pace. And his suit is cool, let's be honest about that too. Dr. Kochin also had a small role in Heroes, but that was like about 10 years ago in the Jakku Mission series, where he teamed up with other mad scientists in the Dragon Ball world. Who knows, maybe Super Dragon Ball Heroes will reunite them at some point. Though he does seem to be quite different tonally from what Super Dragon Ball Heroes is today. At the same time, it would be cool to see Wheelo vs Gero, and if Heroes is good for anything, it's shenanigans like that. So yeah, that's mostly it. Dr. Wheelo is the definition of a classic Dragon Ball movie villain, coming from simpler times where the baddies didn't really try to mimic what was, currently happening in the series. Yeah, they actually tried something new, and the anime actually borrowed from the movie. The ironic thing is that a lot of the traits of himself and his minions were repurposed by characters that are now much better known today. He was fortunate to be a movie villain that is not Broly, Janemba or Cooler. Still, World's Strongest is regarded by the fandom rather fondly, as it does utilise multiple characters and still has some nice martial arts sequences, with Wheelo being a huge part of why this movie works. At the time, he wasn't your typical Dragon Ball villain, but now he is, when we consider the number of mad scientists that have appeared since. We even made a video years ago about this topic. And still, it's worth remembering that he was the original. And hey, even Heroes saw his potential and managed to refresh his look, so, yay?